Good afternoon. This is Getting to Know You, which was the idea of Betty Ozan's saying that we live in a community, but we are having lunch or playing games, but we don't really get to know people, and the people's lives here are very, very interesting. And so we started Getting to Know You. And I, corralled?
That's a good word.
Anyway, Julius was willing to be interviewed. And I think we need background music of New York, New York, because that's what he's all about, or was.
Well, that's where I was from. and
That's right.
I spent the first 65 years of my life there.
Yeah, and have you been back recently?
No,
No? Okay. Do you want to go back?
not particularly.
Once you've been there, you don't need to go again.
Exactly.
Well,
As long as the checks keep coming regularly, that's fine.
yes, because you were a long-term member of the educational system.
Yes, I was.
Yes, and how do you think it's different today than it was when you were there?
Well, quite honestly, I don't think I would want to be a teacher today.
Really?
The whole concept of what is acceptable behavior,
Mhm.
both on the teacher side and on the student side, has completely changed.
Mhm, it certainly has.
And the lack of respect for each other is the thing that distresses me the most.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just is, it's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to learn when you're under fear.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
And it's equally hard to teach.
yes,
You know,
I was going to say.
and at both ends, everybody suffers in that kind of situation.
Mhm. I wish we could get back to that time where it would have been unthinkable to challenge.
It's good to be able to challenge, but the challenge has to be done in an intelligent manner.
Right.
I mean, I had never had a problem with a student telling me that he had a different opinion than mine.
Mhm.
I never had a problem with a colleague or somebody who worked for me telling me that I was wrong and that they had the better answer or the better rule. Sometimes I actually learned from it, you know.
Mhm.
But the point is, there are ways to do it
Mhm.
without being confrontational,
Right.
and certainly without being argumentative.
Mhm. Right. But being respectful.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key, the fact that we seem to have lost the respect for people with whom we disagree.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. And it makes it very difficult to have a conversation when somebody says, I'm important and you're not.
Right, and you don't have to say it in words. It's
Right.
done by facial actions and things of that sort, you know.
Mhm.
And that's the point.
Mhm. You were born into a household of how many children?
Just me and my younger brother.
Mm-hmm. And he was quite a bit younger, right?
6 years.
Mhm. Did you make a good older brother?
Probably not from his standpoint.
What, you were better than you could have been. Huh? And was he a good younger brother?
Also, I mean, we had, you know, the usual rivalries and what have you. And I think the age difference was big enough, at least in our earliest days, to mean that we didn't associate together with the same people generally, you know.
Right.
And so we were tangential to each other for a certain period of time. I mean, I knew he was my brother, and I knew, you know, and I had the familial love for him and so on, but I don't think that we were particularly close.
Mm-hmm. Did your children know him?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay. And do you know how, let's see, I think there are 4 children.
I have 4 children, yes.
And do you know how they would have described him? Their uncle? maybe
Yeah.
different for different ones?
For the most part, I would have described him just as, you know, a passing person in their lives, nothing that was, he didn't make much of a direct impression.
Mhm.
We didn't live particularly close to each other as we grew up, you know, and so they didn't really know him that well.
Mhm. So they didn't have cousins?
No, he had no children.
Mhm.
He didn't get married until he was close to 50,
Mhm.
and he died at 55.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, that was just not something that was there.
Yes, he died very young.
Yes, he did. Very interesting. He was getting his exit physical from the New York City Department of Corrections, where he was a prison warden,
Hmm.
and he was getting his physical to say that he was okay, and you know, that he couldn't sue them for
Mhm.
anything later on.
Mhm.
And while he was in the doctor's office, he had a massive heart attack,
Oh, my
and that
goodness.
was it.
Mhm. Wow.
So,
Mhm.
and we didn't know that he had heart disease or anything of that sort.
Mhm. What about your mom and dad?
Uh, They were both immigrants.
Mhm.
I was the first one born in this country. I was the first one to go to college in the family.
Very good.
So, you know, I mean, it's a little different, I guess, for many of the people, particularly people out here in the West,
Mhm.
because there aren't anywhere near as many, although recently, of course, with the refugees we're accepting, there are immigrants, people who are not born here, but for the most part, most of the people that I've run into in the Southwest are native.
Mhm.
They may come from another state, but they and their families have been here for 100 years or more.
Mhm. You know, I have a very good friend who is a teacher in the New York school districts, and she ended up with lung cancer because supposedly those schools were loaded with asbestos.
Oh, yes, they were. They were loaded with asbestos because, for the best of reasons. Asbestos was a fire retardant,
Mhm.
and so they put asbestos all over the place to keep the buildings from burning up.
Hmm. I wasn't aware of
Yeah,
that.
it was, well, that was the primary use of asbestos as a fire retardant.
Mhm. So there were good reasons,
Oh, yes,
but
yes,
not too good
yes.
outcomes.
Right, nobody knew anything about the cancer
Right.
effects or anything of that sort. And when that was discovered, I mean, the amount of hysteria in the building department of the school system, you know, was just horrendous.
Right.
They wanted to get it out as fast as they could, but they didn't know how,
Mhm.
because much of it was embedded into the construction.
Hmm. So did they tear those buildings down, ignore it?
Well, they didn't ignore it. That's one thing I
Okay.
have to say for them, you know, I mean,
Okay.
people always like to bash big city governments and so on. They did not, they were not immune to it. They were aware of it and they tried to do what they could. But you can't take a big building
Mhm.
that, take the high school that I was at for more years than I care to remember. We had as many as 6,000 students in that building at one time. It
Wow.
was a pretty large-sized building.
Mhm.
You can't just close it down and rip out the asbestos.
Mhm.
You either have to work during the periods of time when there are no students there, which is summer vacations or holidays and things of that sort,
Mhm.
which of course means that the costs go way up because
Right.
being a union state, they were paying top dollar and bonuses for overtime and all the
Mhm.
rest. So that there are reasons why it's not so easy.
Mhm.
You can't just turn around on a dime.
Mhm. What was your way of disciplining your classroom?
There's no one way. You have to discipline based on the circumstances and the situation and so on. Fortunately, I didn't have too much of a discipline problem.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I think because I developed a sense of respect for my students, and I expected them to respect me. And so they could always voice disagreements. We never had that problem. I never said, I said so, that's why, you know.
Okay. It was a mutual, I respect you and you respect me.
Yeah.
And I think we learn from the people we like. You know,
I do
I
too,
think
yes.
the
Oh,
teachers
yes,
that I
yes.
had that I really liked
Uh-huh.
were, and then I had a Latin teacher that I used to think she was the part of the Walking Dead. She was boring, and I loved the Latin stories, etc. But it was hard to learn from her.
Yes. We had a professor of philosophy in college.
Mhm.
Claire, my late wife, and I were in school together at college. We used to love going to class. We could sleep through the hour with no trouble.
Yes.
I mean, he would start and it would be like this, and his voice never changed, and it didn't matter what he was talking
That's
about.
right.
It was the same, you know?
Yep. We can learn from how we don't want to do it as well as
Absolutely,
follow.
absolutely. I mean,
Uh-huh.
that's all part of it, so.
Right. And tell me about those four children.
Well, my eldest he's retired now. He was a banker.
Mhm.
He was, his final position was that of senior vice president at the Chase Manhattan Corporation.
Mhm.
My elder daughter was a physical therapist. She too is retired at this point. And she was one of the people that ran the department at Holy Redeemer Hospital in Meadowbrook, Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
So those two are now asking me for advice on Medicare, and that's when you realize you're old.
Yes, that's right.
When your kids ask you for information on Medicare.
And you have.
My younger two,
Mhm.
my second son is an insurance surety broker. He works for one of the major surety companies in the world, and he's the senior representative in Northern California. My younger daughter works in the movie business. She makes eyewear for use in movies by, depending upon the storyline. If it's a 19th century, you can't use certain kinds of frames and so on and so forth, and all the rest. She makes both fit the actor's face and the period of time in which it's taking place.
That's
and all
an
of that.
interesting little
Yeah,
niche.
yes, it is. She's been doing it for, at this point, close to 30 years.
Wow.
So those are the four.
Mhm. Sounds like you had a very successful crew.
Yes, I did. I have absolutely no complaints as far as that's concerned. I've been blessed.
And what about grandchildren?
I have a total of 8 grandchildren. 4 of them are off on their own and doing their things. My eldest granddaughter is in Ohio. She lives in Columbus, and she just took a position as a vice president in Chase Manhattan.
Very good.
Her brother, I laugh at this, I always say to him, I want you to give me a bottle of it. He sells electricity. He works for a subsidiary of Detroit Edison. He lives in Michigan, and he and his wife, and he negotiates sales of electricity. which is something I find mind-boggling.
Do they have windmills too?
Right at this point, they have both
Sure.
windmills, solar systems, hydroelectric systems, all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And they can deliver, they can guarantee delivery
Mm.
of up to, within 1% of the quantity you want to buy
Mhm.
for a particular time.
Mhm.
It's amazing.
Yes, that's for sure.
And
What was
then,
his background? What was his background? Was he an engineer?
No, he was a marketer.
Interesting.
And that's it. Then my next one was an executive in a Boston-based operation that developed new medical and devices and ideas, and their business pretty much tanked during the period of time of the that we're in now with the COVID situation. So they said to him, "Why don't you go back to school and get an MBA?" And he said, "I have a degree, a master's degree in economics from Duke. What do I need an MBA for?" They said, "For the title MBA, not for anything you might learn from it."
Uh-huh.
And they were willing to pay for him to do so.
Mhm.
So he is currently, and he will be until May of next year, in Philadelphia, which is his home city.
Mhm.
And he's taking an MBA at Wharton.
Mhm.
And the company is paying for him to live in Philadelphia. And he has a lovely apartment in Center City, Philadelphia. I
Uh-huh.
know because I stayed with him for a week.
Uh-huh, very good.
So, I mean, it's amazing what they're doing for him. They
Uh-huh.
obviously want to keep him.
Mm-hmm.
And my next one was for quite a while the second person in charge of Breyer's Ice Cream for Unilever. She just left at the beginning of this year to take a job as a vice president at Peloton, the machine, the
Uh-huh.
gymnastics machine maker. And don't ask me what she does there. Then I have two that are currently in college
Mm-hmm.
and two that are still in elementary school.
Oh, really?
So
Mhm.
I cover,
You have a wide range.
they go from 10 to 37, 38. Our birthday was October 1st.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And how did you, just a minute here, I think I have you down as retired in 1991.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And,
I was retired in 1991.
mm-hmm,
It was an involuntary retirement.
mm-hmm,
I was very happy doing what I was doing. Nobody had any objection to my job and to my function in the job or anything else. It's just that I, like many others, was a victim of racial profiling. The city had too many white supervisors
mm-hmm,
and had to have people of color.
mm-hmm.
The only way they could do that was to get rid of some of the white people,
Mm-hmm.
which is what they did.
Mm-hmm.
They offered us a deal that we couldn't refuse.
Mm-hmm.
3 additional years of pension credit.
Wow, very nice.
So that, along with a bonus for leaving,
Mm-hmm.
made it a pretty sweet offer.
That's right.
And then they leaned on us to go and take advantage of it. So I left.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. You and your first wife were married how long?
55 years. No, 65 years. 65.
65 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yes, it was.
How many different marriages do you think you had?
There's only one I'm aware of.
Oh, no. There's no way people can stay together for 65 years and not have wanting to psychologically divorce from you, remarry.
I truthfully, I don't think that either one of us
Really.
really ever considered that.
Mhm. So it was a good fit.
Oh, yes, by and large, very much.
Mhm. And she also taught, is that correct?
Yes,
So your children had parents who modeled having careers, staying with those careers, a lot more stability than
Yeah,
a lot of
yes.
families have.
yes, and it convinced all of my kids not to go into education as a career. You know, the belief that teachers only work half a day and they have the summers off or this and that. We were, both of us, always busy doing something
Uh-huh.
relating to work.
Mhm. And having continuation credits too, right?
Oh, yeah.
You were
yeah,
required
yeah,
to stay up to date.
Of course. Well, that's true in many, many areas.
Mhm.
And I would say, if anybody's going to get to be anywhere in this day and age, they darn well better do that.
Mhm.
Keep current in what's happening and keep learning.
Mhm. What do you think brought you into education?
Well, I had been working in an engineering firm in the construction department, and we had the Eisenhower recession
Mhm.
in 1957, and they kept most of us on as long as they could, but I could pretty well see the handwriting on the wall. You know, there was no incoming business, no necessary work for me to be doing,
Mhm.
and so I said to my boss, maybe I ought to start looking for something different, you know. He said, well, if you can find something, great. I mean, you know, we don't want to lose you, but,
Mhm.
you know what the situation is. I said, yeah. And I have a brother-in-law who was a teacher and who touted the benefits of being in education, particularly as the recession got worse.
Mhm.
So I said, what the heck? Let me give it a shot. I
Uh-huh.
can always leave it in a year or two if it doesn't work. So I took the exam and had to fill in a lot of credits that I didn't have in education. But I was able to do that while I was working, so that was easy. And my first assignment was in a junior high school in Williamsburg, Brooklyn,
Uh-huh.
which is was and still is a very unique community. It's comprised largely of the lower socioeconomic Hispanics and Hasidic Jews.
Uh-huh.
And the two communities are parallel to each other
Wow.
and have like no connection.
Interesting.
It's fascinating. I mean, the sociologist can have a ball checking it all out, you know. But it really is, it's a very interesting community. Most of the kids that I dealt with in school were Hispanic. And they preferred that term. I mean, the terminology of today is not the same, you
Yes.
know.
Right.
But they refer to themselves as Hispanics. Many of them were Puerto Rican, many were Cuban. There were a few, relatively few South Americans and or Mexicans in the group. For the most part, they were Puerto Rican or Cuban. And the Puerto Ricans had a different attitude in a sense, because they were citizens. All the others had to go through the citizenship requirements, you know, and everything else, with green cards and eventually
Yes.
going up to taking citizenship exams and all the rest.
Uh-huh.
And the Puerto Ricans were there already.
Interesting.
So, you know, I learned quite a bit about the differences, and I was able for most of my life, therefore, able to understand that when we speak about the Spanish-speaking community, we're not talking about a unified,
No, we're
unitary
not.
group. We're talking about this, that, and the other thing, and that they're all different. And they disagree on issues. Cubans and Puerto Ricans do not agree on most things.
If you had to reinvent yourself today, what do you think you would choose to do?
You know, it's interesting, one of my granddaughters asked me that very same question. If you had to go back to work, what would you like to do, you know? And I said, for whatever it's worth, I would probably want to teach in college. The reason for that is not because it's college, but because I don't want to face the difficulties of the classroom in the lower grades. But I enjoyed teaching.
So it fit you well.
Yeah. I mean, I never thought it would. I never originally prepared, you know, for it, but it was a good fit. I enjoyed working with the kids I did, and I heard in my first year of teaching, I heard a couple of the kids refer to me by my first name. And in the New York City school system, you know, it was a very formal system. And from what I understand, it still is, you know. But so I said to the man, hey, you want to call me Julie? That's fine. I call you by your first name. I don't have any problem with that, you know. And so a lot of the kids called me by my first name. And it made a tremendous difference in the way I was approached in teaching. Because if I would say something and a kid had a different point of view, it's different to say, Mr. Altman, I feel, you know, hey, Julie, no, you're wrong. You know, it makes a heck of a difference.
Yes, it's like this instead of like this.
Right, exactly. And you know, I said before I didn't have very many discipline problems, and that's probably the reason why. Because if I'd done you wrong, you could come back and talk to me about it. And that's the way I've always functioned.
And you'd have an open mind.
Yeah, and an open door. Made a big difference.
Do you think you practice that with your children and grandchildren today?
Yes.
That same style?
Yeah, yeah. I listen to a lot of the people here talk to me about their grandkids and how they hear from them on rare occasion and things of that sort. Most of my grandkids call me weekly, bi-weekly, you know, something of that sort. And we talk about things that concern their lives. One of my granddaughters right now, her husband is a physician. He's finishing his last step before he becomes a certified cardiologist. And they're trying to decide where they're going to want to live. Where does he want to start a practice, you know? And I am thrilled that they're willing to ask me for my input.
Sounds like you matter in that family.
I hope so.
But they matter too.
Oh, absolutely.
If you were to live back in Philadelphia, is there anything, how is it different? than when you were there?
Well, I didn't live in Philadelphia for very long.
I see.
After we retired, we moved to Philadelphia because I had two of my four kids living in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
One south of the city, one north of the city.
And were you in the middle?
So that's what we ended up doing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, just about. And so we spent 6 years there, and we were snowbirding at the time because there was no point in going through the snow without having any money coming in as a result of it. So we were out here, and we decided that we'd much rather be in Arizona than in Pennsylvania. And so we left there and came out here. And then our kids who live in California were thrilled with the idea because we shortened their trip.
Uh-huh. How often does your family get together?
Well, we planned our big party for our 50th anniversary, and it was 52nd by the time we were able to get everybody together at one time. It literally took over 2 years to be able to get everybody to commit to the same weekend.
You created independent thinkers.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you want to hear a political discussion going off the rails, listen to my kids.
Uh-huh. They've got different views.
Absolutely. From extremely liberal to extremely conservative.
Really?
They're all over the lot. And that's as it should be.
Uh-huh, right.
You know, I mean, they're each reflecting their own particular lifestyle and everything else. So,
And what about when the grandchildren join in? Are they also all over the map?
they tend to be a little more on the liberal side. There's only one that is, I would say, strongly conservative. And naturally, she's the banker.
That kind of goes together. You also, I'm looking here, your family, do I remember that one was Italian and one was Jewish?
No, both were Jewish. One was Italian, one was Russia, Poland.
Okay, okay. So how did that?
Well, my father came over in 1912, I think it was. And he immediately went to work and started to bring over the rest of the family, you know, his brothers and sisters. First he brought his father and mother over, and then he started bringing his brothers and sisters over. They were all in this country by the time the U.S. entered the war in 1917. My mother's family, my grandfather came over in the also around 1912, 1913, but he brought his wife over in 1915. The war had already started, but he was able to get her out of Italy and back down to the States. And then they were not able to bring any of the kids over because of the war. So my mother didn't get here until the 1920s. And she met my father in a club that they both belonged to,
Mhm.
and they were married in 1927, and I was born in 29.
Mhm.
Uh, And my brother was born in 35. My father died in 1973. He was about 85 years old at that time,
Mhm.
and my mother lived to 96,
Mhm. So you've got some strong genetics there.
hopefully. Um, You know, I had, in a sense, firsthand experience with what happens when you lose your physical abilities, which is what happened to my mother. She was pretty much a decrepit old lady when she finally passed away.
Mhm.
But her mind was as sharp as could be.
Mhm.
On the other hand, Claire's mother was physically in very good shape, but she had 17 years of Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
And by the end, this woman did not even know who she was, let alone anybody else. And it's much better to lose your physical abilities than your mind.
Right. Right.
And so Claire was very concerned about the fact that she might follow in her mother's footsteps.
Mhm.
Fortunately, she didn't.
Mhm.
And I think at this point in my life, I don't think I will, because I don't think I've got another 17 years left.
And if so, you'll still be very sharp.
I would certainly hope so, or at least keep, at least moderately.
Mhm. Well, if children and grandchildren are calling you for advice, that's confirmation.
Yeah, but that's now. One never knows about what's coming.
Mhm. So how often do you and your family get together? Do you go there? Do they come here?
Well, it's a little bit of both.
Mhm.
Like for Thanksgiving, I'm going to my daughter in California. I have stopped going back east in the middle of the winter.
Mhm.
I say it's not worth it.
Mhm. You outgrew the love of snow, huh?
Well, I don't even have the clothes for it anymore.
I know.
But, no, we don't all get together at any one time, you know, it just gets to be too difficult.
Right.
Although, I laughingly said to them, it's gonna be easier as things go along, because two of them are retired now, and there's no longer a job problem in the way, you know?
Uh-huh, right.
So,
Right.
that will make it easy when the other two reach retirement.
Mhm.
So, we'll see what happens then.
How many of them have been here, have seen you in your setting here?
Here, all of them,
All of them?
yeah, oh yeah, more than once.
Mhm. Well, that's a pretty close family.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I've been here for almost 12 years at this point.
Mhm.
So, and we came here, largely it was my older daughter shoving us, not just pushing, but actually shoving us
Uh-huh.
to do it. I gave up earlier, Claire resisted until the very end, basically. But all in all, it has been a very positive situation.
Uh-huh. And what are the changes you've seen at Westminster Village?
I've seen some good changes and some bad changes. I learned a long time ago that if there's nothing that I can do to change things, I am better off just accepting them as they are and going with the punches rather than trying to fight something that's not going to make a difference.
Mhm.
I served on the resident council for 6 years, which at the time that I was on, it was the maximum that was allowed.
Mhm.
And I spent 5 years as chairman of the food committee, and I must say,
That's
I
where you
think,
washed your hair, right?
yeah, yes, in the food. Actually, I would say that most of that time, we had the best food we've had
Mhm.
since, in the 12 years that I've been here.
Mhm.
Largely because the food committee had input with the food managers.
Mhm.
And that was because we didn't just say yes and no, but people had points of view and opinions and disagreements. My meetings were, like my meetings when I ran a department at school, was tumultuous,
Noisy.
noisy, exactly. People voicing opinions,
Mhm.
not everybody smiling at each other and nodding their heads as management said what they should do next.
Mhm.
I have people on there who disagreed vehemently as to what we should be serving, how we should be serving it,
Mhm.
and things of that sort.
Mhm.
But it was always civil, even if noisy,
Mhm.
and people respected each other's points of view.
Mhm.
And we always had these discussions with members of the staff present.
Mhm.
We either had one of the chefs, or the department head, or the representative from Morrison's at our meetings.
Mhm.
And so we ended up in a situation where they knew where we were. And I chose people for the committee, not based on my friends, but on people who had some knowledge and some points of view and were interested in improving the food situation. And that made a difference. This place, like every other, will have highs and lows and times when it's great and times when it's not so good, and so on. We're coming into a different era now,
Right.
and there have to be different ways of approaching things, and I'm willing to let the younger people make those decisions.
Mhm.
Yes,
Right.
before they hired Armand.
And what an awesome addition he's been.
Oh, yes, he has been.
Right.
And
We're
he's
very
doing
fortunate.
a phenomenal job.
Mhm.
And I don't think he realized what was going to happen to the concierge setup as a result of COVID, but
Uh-huh.
he's certainly done a phenomenal job with it.
Yes, we're very fortunate to have him. We have a number of people who
Oh,
work
yes,
here
we
that we're
do.
very fortunate.
Yes, we do. We have overall, I would say, we have an excellent management group.
Mhm. And well, tell me what I forgot. Tell me what I should be asking you.
Well, you kind of tangentially brought in the question of my unusual family background, the fact that my mother's family are Italian Jews.
Mhm.
There happens to be a relatively large number of Italian Jews, mostly in northern Italy.
Mhm.
And it is an old Roman, pre-Roman group,
Really?
yes.
Mhm.
They've been there for literally 1,000 years, you know.
Hmm.
And they're a very proud group,
Mhm.
relatively small overall, probably at its largest, not more than 200,000, and today probably down to about 40 or 50,000.
Hmm.
But they are a significant group.
Mhm.
There are a number of people who are of significance, both religiously and secularly, in Italian history and so on, that are part of them.
Mhm. Have you ever gone there to visit?
Well, when way back in 1954, when I was in the Army and we were living in Germany. My mother decided we should visit the family. And so we got a pass, 3-day pass to go to Italy to visit, and she contacted the relatives, and they were there. The one thing she forgot to tell them, that I was coming, that I was married. So I had I swear, about 15 or 20 young women to look at and decide, and they were very disappointed when I brought my wife.
And did you give her a gold star for that trip?
But we used to kid about it.
Uh-huh.
I used to say, listen, I can always get rid of you and come back.
Your wife had to have a lot of confidence in your mother that she wasn't looking for a replacement.
Well, I would say that my wife and my mother got along extremely well. And
Is that because your wife was very forgiving?
they both were. You know what I mean? You know, that was it. They didn't hold grudges. Some of their biggest arguments were cooking, what the correct way of making something was, you know? And so, right now, I have that discussion from time to time with Norma, you know? For example, I grew up eating a lasagna, but the lasagna would not have any cheese or dairy product in it. It was a meat lasagna. Or it was a dairy lasagna made with ricotta and various other cheeses, and wouldn't come anywhere near any meat, you know? But that's it. And getting that concept across gets to be difficult at times.
Yes. Well, we do have our food cultures, don't we?
Oh, yes. And I think they're a bigger portion of our lives than many of us would be willing to accept or, you know, take as a casual item.
Right, right. Well, I have certainly enjoyed talking with you, preparing for this, and I want to thank you very, very much for
You're very
our
welcome.
interview.
Truthfully, I didn't think anybody would be interested in me, but
Well, I think
That's
they
it.
will be, and I bet I'm going to be right.
we'll find out.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.